Going to ask him to come up and talk to us for a while. Michael Grunwald, we thank you for being here this afternoon.
Thank you so much. It's great. I'm really honored to be here at your climate summit. Honestly, I'm a little surprised you're still allowed to call it a climate summit. But really, whatever you call it, it's truly inspiring to see so many people working to take care of the planet, because it's a really nice planet. It's the only one we've discovered with pizza and breathable air and reliable Wi-Fi. And this is an especially nice part of the planet. It's the only part within Everglades. We really do live in a great place, South Florida in particular, the Earth in general, and I appreciate what you're all doing to try to protect it. So I've written about the environment for a while. Some of you may remember that my first book, The Swamp, is about the Everglades. It was awesome to see some of you brought the dog-eared copies, and that was great. This is crazy. That book is now old enough to vote. It's almost old enough to drink. But anyway, the Swamp was mostly about how development affects our environment. And after it came out in 2006, which was just like a couple months before Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, I started focusing more on how energy affects our environment. I think a lot of the world started focusing on that. But my new focus, what I'll talk about today, is how our food and farms affect our environment. And hopefully, eventually, the rest of the world will come along again. All right, first things first, we gotta eat. All 8 billion of us on this amazing blue marble, we all need food. And that means we need agriculture. We need farmers to perform the daily miracle of transforming sunlight and rain and soil into nutrition. Nobody's figured out a better way to do it. Today, only 1% of Americans farm, and they make it possible for the other 99% of us to be authors, professors, influencers, whatever. Our food does not magically appear on supermarket shelves. Hardworking people grow it, and we should be grateful those people are doing it. But here's a new inconvenient truth. Global agriculture is an environmental disaster. It's the leading driver of water pollution. It's creating nasty algal blooms in the Great Lakes, a dead zone the size of Connecticut in the Gulf of Mexico, some messes in our own backyard, too. It's the leading driver of water shortages, uses 70% of the world's fresh water, sucking a lot of rivers and aquifers dry. And it's the leading driver of deforestation and wetland destruction and biodiversity loss. A lot of individual farmers care a lot about being good stewards of their land, but collectively, they're stewarding a mess. Our food system is also responsible for about a third of the greenhouse gas emissions that are heating up the planet. Now, it's partly diesel tractors and other fossil-fueled farm equipment that emit carbon dioxide. It's partly cattle burping and farting methane. I know it sounds kind of goofy, but it's a problem. And it's partly nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer that is literally made out of fossil fuel. But the main source of emissions is also the main source of all those other environmental problems. It's right on the cover of my new book. We are eating the earth. Agriculture is eating the earth. The cities and suburbs where most of us live cover about 1% of the land on this planet. Farms and pastures cover nearly 40%. We are losing a soccer field worth of forest to agriculture every 6 seconds. Our natural planet is becoming an agricultural planet. This probably sounds a little Captain Obvious, right? Even those of us who live in cities and suburbs, we can see all those circles and rectangles out our airplane windows. We know there's a lot of agriculture out there. Well, the Captain Obvious theme of my book is that there is a lot of agriculture out there. It now covers a landmass the size of all of Asia, plus all of Europe. And it's expanding every day. So we're on track to clear another dozen Californias worth of forest by 2050. And we don't have another dozen Californias worth of forest to spare. Meanwhile, trying to decarbonize the earth while vaporizing trees is like trying to clean your house while smashing your vacuum cleaner to bits in the living room, right? You make a huge mess because you're blasting all that forest carbon and wetland carbon into the sky, but you're also crippling your ability to clean up the mess because forests and wetlands absorb about a quarter of the carbon that we pump into the sky, and they're not very good at doing it when they're no longer around. So it turns out that even if all 8 billion of us stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, we'll still broil the planet if we don't fix food and farms. So I realized in 2019 that I didn't know squat about food or farms. I was an environmental journalist. I'd written about sugar fields and cattle ranches in the swamp. But I was just spectacularly ignorant about how what we eat and how we grow it affects the planet. And I figured if I was this spectacularly ignorant, others probably were too. It was also clear that this that the carbohydrate problem is going to be a lot tougher to solve than our hydrocarbon problem. Because as everyone in this room knows, we know how to fix energy, right? Just electrify the global economy and run it on clean electricity. It's a little easier said than done, but we're actually starting to do it. We're in the midst of this incredible clean energy revolution. But the food and climate problem is still getting worse. And it occurred to me that not only didn't we know the answers, we didn't even know the questions. So that's why I wrote this book. The world wasn't really grappling with this eating the earth problem, and I wanted people to grapple. I spent 5 years grappling, and what I found is that there's, as I expected, a lot that people don't know, but also that so much of what people think they know just isn't so. I mean, if you think the problem is just industrial agriculture, if you've read Michael Pollan and you think this can all be solved by eating local, organic, grass-fed beef from regenerative farms where soil is treated with love and the animals have names instead of numbers, that's usually even worse for the climate than conventional feedlot finished beef. And if you think it's just a Brazil problem, because we don't have so much deforestation in the United States, well, that's only because we deforested our Amazon in the 19th century. Indiana used to be 85% forest, and Indiana soybeans are grown the same way as Brazilian soybeans. This is a global problem, and it is a hard problem. But I will discuss some possible solutions, because I don't want to be a full-time Debbie Downer. I was at Politico when I started researching this book, and no joke, thinking about the climate full-time has been less depressing than thinking about politics. There's some actual good news. And the book actually ends with a genuinely uplifting story in the Everglades. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's about how progress is possible. But first, a little more bad news about the food problem. Like I said, it's mostly a land problem. And here's another extremely inconvenient truth. It's mostly a meat problem. We use 12 billion with a B acres of land for agriculture, and 3/4 of them support livestock. They're either pastures or fields for growing crops for livestock to eat before we eat them. And this sucks because meat is delicious. Humans ate 450 million tons of it last year. So you can't blame farmers and ranchers for producing it. They are supplying what we demand. But eating plants is just a lot more efficient than eating animals that eat the plants. It cuts out the middleman. You have to feed 9 calories worth of plants to a chicken to get 1 calorie worth of meat. Because you have to support feathers and beaks and breathing and clucking and all kinds of stuff that doesn't make meat. And here's some even worse news. Cattle use 10 times as much land and generate 10 times as many emissions per calorie as chicken or pork. They're remarkably inefficient converters of their feed into our food. In the US, we use half our agricultural land to produce beef that provides 3% of our calories. Oh, and humanity is expected to eat 70% more meat and beef by 2050. So that actually is good news for the 6 billion people on Earth who currently eat almost no meat, right? The first thing people tend to do when they stop being poor is they start eating meat. And we want the developing world to develop, but it is going to put even more pressure on the planet. Beef is the #1 driver of deforestation in the Amazon. Soy that gets fed to chickens and pigs is #2. So this is the challenge. To feed the world without frying the world by 2050, we're going to have to make 50% more calories with about 80% fewer emissions. We'll need to make more food with less land and less mess. We're going to have to produce more nutrition over the next 25 years than we've produced over the last 12,000. So that's the problem. Okay, before I talk solutions, there is one more Debbie Downer complication that's making the problem even more problematic. Climate change. We need to grow more food per acre so we can use fewer acres to grow food, but agriculture is riskier than ever in a warming world. More intense droughts and floods kill crops and livestock. Pests and diseases keep invading new regions. We need wheat yields to increase by 1/3 over the next 3 decades, and some scientists believe climate change will reduce them by 1/3. Okay, I know, I'm like super fun at parties. I do write about dozens of promising solutions in my book, and the first thing I should say about them, spoiler alert, bummer alert, is that none of them have gotten much traction. I'm sorry, you were so kind to invite me. You were like, oh, the swamp guy would be fun. And now you're like sitting out there like, should we be euthanizing our kids? Look, it really is a hard problem, and we haven't made a lot of progress yet. I am sorry. But when I started reporting on climate 20 years ago, we hadn't made any progress on fossil fuels. Wind and solar combined were about 0.2% of global energy. There was a new documentary that had just come out called Who Killed the Electric Car? So things can change. They don't change themselves. Here's a joke from the book. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the bulb really has to want to change. All right, so if we really want to change, how do we do it? Well, let me start by talking a bit about the demand side, food consumption, what we eat. Because I can give you a long list of dietary changes that would reduce our demand for land, but there are really only 2 big ones. Eat less meat, especially beef, and waste less food. I'll start with food waste because it's insane that we waste at least 1/4 of our food. That means we waste 1/4 of the land, water, and fertilizer we use to grow our food. We use a landmass the size of China to grow garbage. When the scientists at Project Drawdown ranked the top 100 solutions for reducing emissions, reducing food waste was #1. And the average American household wastes more than $2,000 a year on food that ends up in landfills emitting methane. So the incentives are really good, right? People love meat, but nobody loves food waste. Still, changing individual behavior is really hard. When food prices shot up after the pandemic and Americans got pissed off about their grocery bills, you want to guess how much they reduced their household food waste to save money? I saw somebody in there, 0%. Well, I have to say, my household reduced our food waste 100%. But that's because Mill Technologies, a startup founded by the guys who invented the Nest thermostat, they gifted me one of their new food dehydrators. Right? We throw all our food scraps into it, and overnight it turns it into chicken feed, with no stink, no noise, no schlep. Keeps it in the food system. And again, the thing is, human beings are not awesome at making big sacrifices for the planet, but we are pretty awesome at inventing stuff that can change outcomes without changing hearts, right? Grocery stores are already using AI and other technologies to reduce waste. They're tracking their inventory. They're automatically putting stuff on sale before it spoils. And even behavioral change is not impossible, right? We usually waste less food at cafeterias that sell food by the ounce or that don't give us trays. And government can help at schools and public buildings. It's going to be a little tougher for government to help us eat less meat, even though I will say Project Drawdown ranked plant-forward diets as the #3 solution to reducing emissions. But I quoted one pollster who said taxes and other restrictions on meat were literally the least popular policy he had ever polled. His quote was that it was like veterans' benefits for ISIS. Again, meat tastes good. I stopped eating beef and lamb when I started working on this book, but even I haven't gone vegan. I mean, we all find the level of hypocrisy that we're comfortable with. I have solar panels and an electric car, but I also fly too much. Perfect isn't usually on the menu, but better is better than worse. And cutting out beef, it turns out, is usually, like, going vegan is the best, but no beef is usually about as good as going vegetarian, because vegetarians tend to eat more dairy, and cattle are bad. Of course, cows produce milk a few times a day. They only produce beef like once in their lifetime. So beef is really, really bad. But again, just as Willie Sutton said he robbed banks because that's where the money is, if you care about reducing emissions from the food system, you've got to care about beef because that's where the emissions are. And we know it's possible for us to eat less beef because we've already reduced our per capita beef consumption by about 1/3 over the last half century. I mean, not because we wanted to save the planet. We did it because chicken got cheap. But at the risk of sounding like the eat more chicken cow in those Chick-fil-A ads, that shift did more to reduce US emissions than any shift before the rise of solar. And we still eat 4 times as much beef as the global average, so there's plenty of room for improvement. The average American eats the equivalent of 3 burgers a week, and if one of them was plant-based, we'd save a Massachusetts worth of land every year. I know everybody's making fun of plant-based meat these days, right? And the supposedly free state of Florida banned lab-grown meat made of animal cells before it even made it to market. Right? But alternative proteins are probably the most alluring analogy to alternative energy like wind and solar. I actually started reporting the book at the Good Food Institute conference in 2019, which is kind of the kind of get-together of everybody working on meat substitutes. And this was just a few months after that massive Beyond Meat IPO. The company was suddenly worth 1/3 as much as Tyson Foods. And the exuberance at this conference was like off the charts. People were discussing if it was going to take 10 or 15 years to get rid of the entire $2 trillion meat industry. I thought I was going to accidentally raise a Series A round on the drinks line. But then, of course, the boom busted, and today Beyond Meat has gone from $250 a share to $1 a share. Everybody's saying that fake meat was just a dumb fad. But again, I think it's just as excessive as the exuberance. Look, the old Beyond and Impossible burgers, they were way better than the old vegan hockey pucks, right? How many of you have tried Beyond or Impossible? Right? Yeah. And how many of you still eat them regularly? Look, they weren't better or cheaper than meat, so consumers didn't keep eating them. It's an amazing technological achievement to construct meat out of plants that's 80% as good and only 50% more expensive than animal meat, but it's like not a business model. Even though it uses 90% less land and kills 100% fewer animals. The dogs didn't like the food. But I try to point out that the cow is a pretty mature technology, and fake meat isn't. It can get better and cheaper and healthier, especially if it gets some government help like wind and solar and electric vehicles have. Even at the local level, you can serve less beef in schools and other cafeterias. In blind taste tests, plant-based nuggets now do as well as chicken nuggets. I mean, who even knows what's in a chicken nugget anyway, right? And they're just vehicles for sauce. I wrote about the New York City hospitals. They started giving patients plant-based meals as the default, unless they specifically requested meat. And they worked hard to make it good. They went from 1% vegetarian meals to 51%, and they cut their emissions by a third. So it'd be great if we could eat a little less beef. We're also going to have to make less damaging beef. And no, that's not grass-fed beef. Cattle that spend their entire life in pastures are actually worse for the climate and the planet than grain-finished beef. Better beef really means more efficient beef. In Brazil, I saw degraded ranches with only one cow for every 5 acres, and the cows looked like they were on hunger strikes. But then I saw upgraded ranches that supported a cow on every acre. So they used 1/5 as much of the Amazon to produce the same amount of beef. If beef was only 2 times as bad as chicken, rather than 10 times, we'd be eating way less of the earth. So now I'm talking about the supply side, about food production. And here, the inconvenient truth is that we need even more productive production. The rich world already has pretty productive agriculture, thanks to the Green Revolution that began in the 1960s, right, with high-yield seeds and chemical fertilizers and pesticides, boo, large-scale irrigation, yuck, big tractors, automated factory farms, we hate that. Well, the Green Revolution tripled crop and livestock yields. That means we're making 3 times as much food per acre. Otherwise, we'd need 3 times as many acres to make the same amount of food. We would literally need a planet B. And you know, Sri Lanka's government, they tried to ban agrochemicals and mandate organic farming. Within months, yields crashed, food prices soared, they had food riots, the government fell, the president had to flee. Look, fertilizers and pesticides do have some downsides, but they also help crops grow and they kill pests that prevent crops from growing. And even if the world cuts food waste in half and the rich world cuts meat consumption in half, we're still going to need to make more food with less land. The math sucks. So we're going to need a greener green revolution. And one reason that I'm genuinely hopeful about the future is all the brilliant scientists and entrepreneurs and idealistic young people who are working on cool solutions to these problems. Feed additives that help cattle burp less methane, biopesticides that use the RNA technology behind the COVID vaccines to literally constipate potato beetles to death so you don't have to nuke the whole field with chemicals. Biofertilizers that use gene-edited microbes to fetch nitrogen from the air and feed it to crops so you don't have to use as much fertilizer that ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. At the University of Illinois, scientists are literally reinventing photosynthesis, right? Just done a pretty good job maintaining life on Earth for the last few billion years, but it turns out to have real inefficiencies when it comes to crop growth. So they're using AI and gene editing and big data to engineer away those inefficiencies, and they think they can increase crop yields 50% over the next couple decades. So I think we need to hurry up and figure out which of these cool innovations to make more food with less land will work, and then we've got to deploy the ones that work. But I should at least acknowledge that there is an alternative view of this stuff, and you can call it the Michael Pollan view. But that's that we don't need a greener green revolution, that we never should have had a green revolution in the first place. I will point out that even Michael Pollan admits that half of us on Earth would not be here if it wasn't for the green revolution. So unless you kind of want to go all Thanos and get rid of half of all life on Earth, I think that's kind of a tough call. But look, there is this deeply held view that intensive high-yield agriculture is a huge environmental tragedy, and that the real solution is to get away from GMO crops and massive factory farms and return to the rustic pastoral agriculture of yesteryear, right? Kinder and gentler and more natural farms that can reverse global warming through regenerative practices that soak up bad carbon from the sky and repatriate it as good carbon in agricultural soils. And I should say, it's not just hippies and foodies pushing this view that our soil is going to save us. It's RFK Jr. and Joe Rogan and the big environmental groups and the big foundations and celebrities like Jason Momoa and Giselle in documentaries like Kiss the Ground and Common Ground, and even big ag giants like Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland, and big food conglomerates like General Mills and PepsiCo. Right now, only about 3% of climate finance is flowing into the food system, and this is where most of it is flowing, towards this kind of faith-based transformation of farming. And it's kind of crazy. I mean, good soil is good. Regenerative practices like cover crops and no-till can help soils. And even though the Dust Bowl happened before the Green Revolution, I always like to point that out, some industrial practices can hurt soils. It's also true factory farms dump a lot of crap in rivers and lakes. But the real environmental tragedy of agriculture is not the intensification of these rustic Michael Pollan-approved farms. It's the initial transformation of prairies and forests and other natural landscape into those rustic Michael Pollan-approved farms. It's when farms get more extensive, not more intensive. That's when we lose the carbon. That's when we lose the biodiversity. And again, low-yield ag that makes less food per acre needs more acres to make food. So it converts more wild land into farmland. We shouldn't shame farmers for making lots of food. That's usually the most sustainable practice. Oh, and by the way, this idea that regenerative carbon farming can convert agriculture from a climate problem to a climate solution by sequestering vast amounts of carbon in the soil, that's mostly nonsense. It's hard to measure the soil and carbon in soils. It's even harder to make sure it stays underground. And it's almost impossible to make more soil carbon without applying more soil nitrogen, and that has huge climate problems of its own. There's just a ton of magical thinking around this stuff. Carbon neutral beef and carbon negative milk are not real things. General Mills financed a climate analysis that claimed a regenerative ranch in Georgia was carbon neutral, and then you look at the fine print, it uses twice as much land per pound of beef as a conventional ranch, and the study didn't assign that any climate cost. Corporate polluters are already trying to offset their emissions by paying farmers millions of dollars in private carbon markets. Al Gore has a regenerative farm in Tennessee. He holds a regenerative conference every year. Even he says that these markets are cruising for a bruising. And the basic problem, and this is the root of the eating the earth problem, is that they ignore the importance of land. They treat land as if it were infinite, as if it were free. The main character essentially discovers the eating of the earth problem when he stumbles into climate analyses of biofuels like corn ethanol, and he realizes that the analysts, they blew off the carbon costs of land use. The idea that if you use farmland to grow fuel, you're going to need more farmland to grow food, and it's not going to be grown in a parking lot. It's going to be in a forest or a wetland or something else that stores a lot of carbon. He realized that biofuels eat the earth. And here's the thing. Biofuels are eating about a Texas worth of the earth. Agriculture is eating 75 Texases worth of the earth. So we're going to need better policies that take land seriously, but what we really need is a new land ethic that treasures every acre as a potential source of nutrition to help feed us, or carbon storage to help save us, or shelter, to help house us, and then tries to help every acre live up to that potential. So let me just finish with a quick story about one of my favorite eating the earth solutions. It's a local one. It's a miracle tree called Pongamia. So it grows seeds that are basically like soybeans, except with 4 times the yields and in much worse land with no fertilizer and no irrigation water. And it's a tree, so it stores carbon above the ground that you can see and measure and reward through non-bogus carbon credits. Now look, it's kind of tough to get farmers to plant a new crop, especially a tree crop that isn't going to have its first harvest for 4 years. But after citrus greening started wiping out Florida's citrus groves, a few farmers up the road in Vero Beach were desperate enough to give it a try. And it all sounded too good to be true. So I visited the first Florida Pangamia grove with Naveen Sika, who's the founder and CEO of a startup called Terviva that's trying to optimize and commercialize Pangamia. And sure enough, the trees were doing great. Some of them were producing 10 times the yields of soybeans with no chemicals. They were like vertical regenerative soy. I tell this story in the book. I mean, the awesomeness of Pangamia is kind of hilarious. It's just one miracle after another. At one point, we were talking to his team. They had dribbled a little bit of Pangamia oil on a dying Tangelo plant, and it literally came back to life. I mean, it's like this plant can save everything. And here's the thing. After 16 years of work, Terviva's only got trees on 1,500 acres. The world has 300 million acres of soybeans. It is so damn hard to change the world in a hurry, and especially the world of food and agriculture. If you guys thought energy was hard, thought transportation was hard, thought factories were hard, food is personal, it's cultural. We vote on these issues 3 times a day, and we don't like to be told how to vote. So we're going to need political change, we're going to need technological change, and behavioral change. We're going to need Pangamia and fake meat and those mill dehydrators and pasture intensification. We need it all to get to scale. Again, I'm Debbie Downering. But if the eating the earth problem was an easy problem to solve, we would have solved it already. And another thing that humans are pretty good at is solving hard problems once we focus on them. We haven't focused on this one yet, which is why I'm running around the country yelling, "Focus!" But I'm really grateful that all of you have focused for the last half hour. You guys have focused your career on trying to solve these problems, and I'm hopeful that the rest of the world will follow your lead. Thanks. Thanks so much.